Awesome.
But if we do you have a mic live?
Have the mics. I'm gonna go make the announcement.
Great.
Let's see if we're getting a
Do you have
level.
the slide ready?
Yes, the slide.
Perfect.
I'm not sure it's getting an audio level.
Okay.
It seems to be registering.
I think it's registering from this mic, not from the actual.
Where is the option to change out the?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not
Edit.
so
Customization.
I don't know.
Might be under the options for the actual website. Sometimes.
Oh, it says webcam there. Manage.
What if you try the little dots beside the URL? Like,
Beside the URL.
Yeah. Can you change sound to? What if you make it not automatic? Then
Reset permissions.
I don't know.
Hello.
Or site settings.
No, I think it's still the same.
I can work on it if you need to get.
Could you just like log onto can you just log onto the live stream from like your phone to see what the audio is like?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go tell people to start coming in here. Can I?
Yeah.
Okay. Yay! Now live on your channel. Whoop, whoop.
Does it work?
The video doesn't do troubleshooting it. Worst case scenario, it's just the computer sound and we're speaking to mics anyway. So.
Sounds good.
So what I was gonna
No,
say is
you're
that
doom
sounds like an idea for a work. Yeah, go ahead, do something with that. Yeah. Honestly, that could work. I could see that vision.
I could have, like, I have so many cool performance art ideas.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. It's like, why would I do it? It's not bad.
Oh, that's weird.
I'm already tired.
Or do you want to wait? If you have the computer like closer to us,
We could
pick up the sound better.
do that. Emmy? Sure. I'm gonna be the timekeeper. I'm gonna be like here.
I want to see your beautiful mind. I promise.
Oh, I think I just got it. There's
There. Black Magic Design. That should be it. Okay. Can you try speaking into the mic again?
Hello, test already.
Oh shit. Maybe we need to save the settings somehow.
Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Yeah, it seems to still be picking this up. Maybe go away and back. Did it?
Ooh. Not
Honestly,
good.
this is-
It's because that's feeding back.
Okay. What if can I just stand across the room with your phone and see how that works?
It's because that's feeding back.
This is perfect digital chaos.
Where did you?
Okay.
Did you find that?
It was like,
Here?
wait, here, and I click there,
Oh.
and then manage, and then microphone.
It is showing Blackmagic Design.
Maybe it just needs to be like re-initialized or something.
It might be, but that could cause problems.
I think if we're diligent about
Okay.
speaking into the mics, the sound is fine.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. I will
Great.
get out of the way.
Okay.
I'm just gonna, when it's like time things, I'm just
No,
gonna...
because my little brother's on this live stream. I'm just gonna save it and make fun of me.
I'm just gonna wave at you at the different times.
They just wanted Jan.
Yes.
Make it a big wave in case I'm really lost in.
Wait, it's okay.
You're lucky. Hello? Hello.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for coming out to the artist talk for Memes and Machines. I'm Emmy. I facilitated the event. I'm really just going to be up here to ask a couple of questions. The idea is that I speak as little as possible, and you just get to hear from these awesome folk about the work that they've contributed to the show and their practices in general. So we'll talk for about an hour, and then there will be roughly 30 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So get your questions ready. There's a mic over there if you're interested in asking a question at the end. And then, yeah, we'll just go through it. So I'm going to start by asking everybody to please introduce yourself, your name, your program, your pronouns, and just so that everybody can match faces to works, which works you contributed to the show today. So we'll start with Colin.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Colin. I use they, he pronouns, and I'm a first year in intermediate cyber arts. I'm a student and an artist, and I make mostly artworks using programs like Max MSP. I'm really interested in interactive works, but I'm not limited to a medium. I like exploring things through digital mediums because I feel like that lets me address and explore topics I'm interested in. I'm especially interested in right now the medium of the online and how that affects us psychologically, but also in different ways in all areas of your life. And I'm especially interested in how memes and that online culture kind of seeps into our behavior and how we organize ourselves. So yeah. Right. So the works I have in my show, I have two works here. I have a video work called, it's kind of a long name, hands me underscore. It's the video work outside next to the other ones. And I also have an immersive installation called MEMES+MACHINES. And yeah, you can read about it in the template.
Hi everyone, I'm Ibrahim Mahmoud. I'm a fourth year photography major. I'm graduating this year from Concordia. I've also done a lot of classes in sociology, intermedia. The work I'm showing right now is called New Folder. It's this sort of 2-screen installation with 2 projectors of just a bunch of slide images scanned and like going fast and very colorful. Yeah, for my practice, I tend to explore this intuitive process of using images to maybe sort of like deconstruct different narratives that are underlined behind the images to sort of understand like how images are easily mediums of narrative manipulation, or how we can sort of like the image maker can sort of leave pieces of identity in his images, like in the process of making some, whether it be through like formal choices, composition, colors, etc., etc. Yeah, I'm gonna talk more about that later.
Hello, I'm Alex. I'm a third-year computation art student. The work I presented today was Routine, which was representing cycles of inanimate objects and within the human body. My practice focuses mostly on 3D work as well as video, but like Colin, my practice isn't fixed to a single sort of art category. I like to explore all the different possibilities, and I think that's the benefit of just being an artist, is you can be creative in any choice you want to go on. And so this work that I presented today was just kind of a work that is like the building blocks of kind of my art practice, but it doesn't define my whole art catalog.
Hi, I'm Mahiam. Today I have two works with Anakin here. We have DIY glittery slime tutorial no borax and querying the machine. Personally, my practice is more geared towards painting, programming, electronic arts, and video installation. I explore topics like neurodivergency, liminal spaces, feelings of loneliness through those different mediums. And together, we're kind of more focused on neurodivergency, playfulness, using humor in our video work, and yeah, just exploring the visual mediums too.
I'm Anakin, the other half of the video works aforementioned. My practice is primarily video, but I'm particularly interested in questions of identity and pop culture and internet culture and how they all affect each other. I won't go too much into the commonalities again, since we've mentioned that already, but yeah, we're collaborators. We work together on our video works, and we'll continue to collaborate together. So we're one entity.
Great, thank you guys. So to start, this is a show that obviously has a lot of tech in it. I don't know if you noticed, but no two works use the same kind. They're all different kinds of monitors. It's all different kinds of sensors and cameras that we're using. But not only does it involve a lot of tech, most of the work is also really self-reflexive in that it is also about technology and the medium that it is using. So I'd like you to start by sharing just a little bit about how technology shapes your practice. What draws you to tech and tech-based art and or digital art making, and how are you influenced by that medium?
No need to go in order.
So since me and Marianne really like to explore topics of neurodivergency, I feel like that's an interesting connection to my general interest in technology, in that I'm particularly looking at artistic products as a way of expressing special interest as an autistic person. The works that we've presented today, particularly how it's made, clips being used in Querying the Machine, that comes from special interest and kind of neurodivergency. So for me, technology is a way of integrating my own ways of interpreting the technology that I consume. The consumption of content is a large part of the production of the content that I create.
I think to talk more about that as well, especially in DIY glittery slime tutorial no borax, we really, like in all of our works that we've done together, we really try to keep the content we consume and the content it's based on alive, and like really use that content as a medium. So the glittery slime tutorial is obviously based on YouTube tutorials, which ideally I think we present on YouTube, and we want to do more of that. And then Querying the Machine keeps the editing style and the medium of the how it's made videos really together as well. So yeah, that's how we're kind of really talking about the medium of like digital media and content and stuff online.
Yeah, for me, my work focused on the human body as a machine, but by looking at like inanimate objects and nature through repetitive cycles, and how that sort of repetitiveness is kind of embedded within humans as well, except we're not so conscious of it because it's in our everyday life that we're not aware. We're just repeating everything over and over through eating, through movement, through play, through breathing. All these things are repetitive, and in a way it kind of resembles a machine and their mechanisms, because all the parts that form a human are needed in order for the human body to function. The same thing for an inanimate object like a fan. You need all the components to work together, or else it'll be broken or dysfunctional. So that's kind of how I saw technology in my work.
I have to say, I feel that I agree a lot with all three of you in using technology in our works to approach the daily And I feel especially, I feel that growing up with online culture, and as you described the slime videos, I mean, I've made so many slimes growing up. I still watch slime videos, like the satisfying ASMR stuff. And while I was watching your videos, my eyes kept just going back to like, I really want to touch that. But yeah, like I'd say I use technology, especially computers and art, because for one, it's a medium I'm both familiar and very unfamiliar. There's always so much to learn through them, so much to do. The potential is, I mean, every day it grows, right? And there's so much you can do in it, but also it's a point of entry for me because it's something I'm somewhat familiar with that I kind of already have a grasp in. So when you already have your foot in the door, it's easier to do more of it. But absolutely, I feel like when it comes to looking at how the digital has affected me, has affected people around me, and especially how it affects our current world, I actually find it really important to talk about these issues and to look at them through the mediums themselves, let the medium speak for itself.
I think there's definitely something like a pattern that like repeats with all our with all our answers, and it's like to me, it's a question of accessibility, like through technology, and it just makes art making processes like that much more democratic in a way. But it's also like seems to be so integrated in our daily lives. Like for my work, it's scanned physical archives, but I was very aware of it. Like I worked in a photo lab before. I worked a lot with like physical negatives that people would come in and like develop their film. They wouldn't pick up their negatives, or like they would take prints. They wouldn't pick them up because everything is just like scan, scan, scan. And yeah, it becomes like so seamless, the whole like shift between the physical and the digital world, that like I think it's kind of ironic that through technology we're kind of like exploring how technology is so omnipresent. Like yeah.
I feel like it's those contradictions that make technology so interesting as a subject in artworks. Like we talk very often about how the online connects us in so many ways, but it also really distances us from each other. And there's so many contradictions woven into just this like nebulous idea of technology. Just looking at what you said about the waste of people using analog to get the look, but you can get that look with filters now. You can get that look with AI, but there's this need to go authentic, but they're just producing scans. So I feel like exploring that contradiction is especially important, but also it's just really interesting. Yeah.
I think what brings me to technology is, like Ibrahim said, is the accessibility of like a lot of open source programs you can use, and you can learn now with the internet, like through tutorials and whatnot, which you couldn't do before. And so growing up in this age of technology to me is beneficial in that way, because you can kind of become an artist independently without even having to perfect skills, but you could just kind of learn on your own and build pieces together and then merge different media together, like 3D and video or painting and digital. So I think with technology, the sky's the limit for what you can do with art. And yeah.
I think there's an idea that keeps coming up in a lot of what we're saying about the engagement with the materiality of technology. A lot of our works engage with the formats that we're trying to mimic or that we're talking about. And I think that what is so compelling about engaging with that in artistic sense is that we can begin to ask those questions about, how does the digital actually exist, and will it continue existing, and how will it continue existing? Like, there are physical servers that hold most of the information that we're using in this digital cloud, there's a real impact on the physical world. And so to begin to question, how does this exist and how can we change its existence? How do we contribute to its existence every day? Those are the kinds of questions that interest me in the connections between all of our work and the show, the idea of memes repeating things that get recycled and the machines, the recycling, and the ways that those interact with each other.
Thank you guys for that. We, just going back to what you guys were touching on with that weird paradox of the fact that there's so much access, but there's also so much garbage. I told you about this last time we had our mock artist dog. I have almost no photos of me from this little personal anecdote. I have almost no photos of me from before my little brother was born. He was born when I was 3, and that's because my parents got a new camera when he was born. And then a couple years later, when they got their first MacBook and they tried to digitize it, the image files from that original camera that they had when I was first born were totally corrupted. And so those images exist somewhere as corrupted files, but in this like digital black hole that is probably even more robust than the whole internet. And it's weird to be living in this kind of, like what you were saying, this paradoxical state where we're more connected than ever, but we're also more disconnected than ever, and everything's more accessible than it ever was, but it feels like you never have access to anything because everything's behind paywalls, or you have to go through all of these loops and whatever to get to it. And it's weird, and it messes with your psyche, and that leads me into the next question of, and again, we were starting to touch this already, but how growing up in the digital age and how having technology be so present throughout your entire life has shaped your identity, whether that be as an artist or otherwise.
For me, growing up, I think in a way, like video games, like the aesthetics of them kind of inspired me. Like it wasn't so much the game that was fun for me, but it was more kind of seeing these virtual worlds that don't exist outside of the screen that kind of pulled me into technology and to game making. And so through doing that and through kind of inspirations of different games and their worlds that I wouldn't see, it kind of brought new light into what I could create through technology. And so like drawing and painting was something I always did, but I never really got into technology before video games. And so the video games kind of helped me as an artist to shape myself into focus on more like 3D worlds and kind of focus more on the unrealistic side of life and more on what we can create that doesn't exist. So that's what really interests me, is like, what doesn't exist in real life? What can we create that's new and different?
I think for me it's very similar as well. I don't think I have a single memory where I wasn't like connected somewhere to digital media or technology, or like I grew up obsessed with robots and machines, and that's how the Queering the Machine came from. That's me that's obsessed with how it's made. And like I got my first email when I was like 5 or 6 years old. So it's always been a constant in my life, like technology or social media as well. So yeah, so of course, growing up with that, it's gonna come out in my artwork somewhere. And like even my painting is based on photography and digital media. So it's kind of the one constant I have in my artistic practice. And I think it's valid for a lot of us as well, since we're kind of the generation that actually grew up with technology and with the internet, and grew up with it as well. Like the internet grew with us. So of course, the culture we consume and all those memes, all those social media formats, of course it's going to affect us and influence our artistic practice.
I think you said something really interesting about growing up with the internet and the kind of evolution aspect, which I think is why I really wanted to make the slime tutorial and why we fell on that, because it was a thing that, you know, me and my youngest sibling would watch a ton of when we were kids and grew up wanting to make ourselves, especially because we didn't have borax. It needs to be no borax, like the title. But the internet has changed so much, and internet culture obviously is also changing because of that, because as the format of the internet, the way it exists evolves, so does the way that we interact with it. So for me, creating a slime tutorial, something that's not so much pervasive anymore. In my research for creating the work, I did watch a lot of slime tutorials, and most of them were dated back quite a few years ago. So there's this idea of the trends and what's in and what's out, but creating a slime tutorial is in a way kind of archiving the way that the internet was for a certain period of time. And I think the idea of internet archive in general is really interesting to me. I'm really interested in the way that the internet shapes us, as I've stated. So what exists on the internet and what goes away and what are we trying to keep, and, you know, video games that I managed to torrent from the internet, or all these things that we're existing with that maybe are not easily accessible, but we find ways to access. I think the resistance of that and the way that we choose to re-access the things that matter to us and play with them in our artistic works, I think that that's a driving force in why I choose to create what I choose to create.
I have to say, I really agree with feeling like you grew up with the internet and seeing it growing past you in a sense. I noticed that none of us really use the term digital native, and I'm not sure how I feel about that term, but I do feel that in some way you could notice even millennials, like Gen Zers especially, like grabbing onto the internet as a refuge. I felt that growing up, the online was like the third space that no longer exists for me. I felt like I didn't really have, I guess, the confidence to go to parks or to hang out in malls, and I turned to the internet kind of as a place to run away, or I found freedom in it. But again, it's very contradictory because the internet, and if I'm honest, this is my belief, but I feel is dangerous. It's not as safe as you're behind a screen, just turn it off. And as we're seeing nowadays more and more, the influence of the online has very much real consequences on cultures, on lives, on politics. And as we grew up with it, it's crazy to see it. I wouldn't say mutate because it's been heading that way for a while, but just become this huge thing. I'd say the internet really shaped my identity as that for me, it's still a comfort, but now it's also, I kind of hate it. But yeah, it's a complicated relationship.
Honestly, I guess I'm thankful that for me growing up, like we were like kind of like really broke, so I didn't like have a phone till I was like 15, 16. We didn't have a home laptop and stuff, so I guess like my biggest influence with media was just like that big old CRT TV that we had that only played Arabic satellite channels. It was just like news and like old Levantine Ramadan shows, and so I think like in a way like yeah, that did like help construct my identity somehow growing up. Like it was like a really strong visual connection to like where my parents came from, where I kind of come from too, and so I think like that kind of like evolves as I grew up and as I got like more access to the internet. But I do agree that like now it's at this like really scary point that we're seeing almost no limit to how much like media and internet can bleed into like the next generations as kids' lives. Like when the first time we had a meeting, all of us, I made a joke to Emmy about like the skibbity toilet phenomenon. But like it's gotten like really bad, and like I think like there's this theme in all our works of like brain rotting. Like that's definitely a big inspiration for like just like the overwhelming presence of media just being like gunned down at you like all the time. Like it's kind of weird. It's kind of like very easy for you to get lost. And I'm very aware of that because like, for example, during the pandemic, I had this like whole like ultra radical leftist, which I still kind of am like period, but like it was so alienating how much like atomization there was of like political identities. And it's like every single meme page had like Marxist Trotskyite, or the other one's like actually Marxist Leninist is like better, and like it's like the tiniest like bit of difference like would ignite like entire civil wars basically within like the same political ideologies, and that's like 100% facilitated through like internet and social media. So it's kind of insane.
I find that really, really interesting because I do agree, and it can be really frustrating to notice, right? And to at some point you find yourself, and when I found myself somewhere like that, I realized I was looking more for community, and I was looking for an identity to feel like I belong. But there's actually a lot of interesting discussions about the alt-right, for example, and they don't have the same struggle that you described. They're actually all like, yeah. And
We're all on the same page.
there's a fair amount of like studies and essays, and academics are really starting to latch on to the influence of echo chambers and these online spaces where especially extremist ideas can spread so fast. So I think it's definitely something I'd like to look at, the radicalizing and it's kind of like accelerating property of the internet and of meme culture because of how bite-sized and small and easily they can spread virally. I think it's very interesting how the medium is shaping the way we think and the way we organize. And like, yeah, January 6th would not have been possible without Facebook or 4chan.
Yeah, 100%. I hear what you're saying, and I think that the internet, as it gets bigger, also gets smaller, and that's the idea of the echo chamber of like the more and more that everybody is connecting, the more that somebody is finding somebody who's really similar to them, and then how those form micro communities and micro niches, and then everybody gets lost in their own self. I feel like it roots you back into yourself to have it opened up so wide and then just be influenced by people who are exactly like you. And it's hard because you don't know you're going down a rabbit hole until you have. And I remember many years ago, I made my younger brother promise never to download Reddit because I did not want him to go down a pipeline like that. I don't know if that was actually, the way to do that, but like as a 16-year-old, I had a fear that my 14-year-old brother would like end up on the wrong page someday and then somehow end up, hating people who were like me or hating just others in general as an answer to, how much crap there is just in the world right now, and it's that call and response of like, you see something externally in the way that the world is going, and maybe you don't agree with it. And then what's your solution but to, speak to people who think like you, and then the process of the echo chamber.
It's also, when we're talking about the internet getting bigger and bigger, it's also getting like deader and deader. Like no one cleans the internet. There's so many like pages that are just dead, and it's a page about like someone's cat that died in probably like 2017 or something. But there's so many of that, and like that's all content that we lose. And that's all content that once had a value and once had a life. But now like you can't find the hyperlink anymore. You can't find anything about it, but you might stumble on it like in a rabbit hole or something. But it also means that there's so much old content that's just bullshit and it's so polluted, and there's just so much stuff. And yeah, so it gets bigger and bigger, but also like more forgotten at the same time. So that's kind of an interesting thing about internet as a medium. There's so much material, but where do you stop looking at stuff? Where do you stop consuming? all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say just a tiny thing, and it might not be very serious, but I mean it. Have you seen these like AI generated things on Facebook where the machine is like feeding itself?
Yeah.
Where the audience knows, you guys know what I'm talking about? The lobster Jesus stuff. Where the machine, yeah, well, there's the shrimp one, there's tigers, these are like airplanes where AI bots are kind of picking up. They're like, oh, a lot of likes this one. This is like a cute tiger. And this one has a lot of likes. It's Jesus, because of course. So it started like just fusing them together, and making these really like uncanny, kind of honestly beautiful and like a disturbing way. These like AI generated images, and at first it was people reacting to it, like mostly older people who were like, hell yeah, Jesus in plane. But now it's the machine feeding itself, and there's so many bots that are just liking each other. And that also speaks to kind of like the death in production. The fact that we're making more things somehow kills us and kills these spaces that we're alive. I mean, I'm not saying I want to revive Facebook, but like I'm just it's dying quickly right now. And it's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of the other end of the death. Yeah.
Please look up Shrimp Jesus if you can on Facebook.
I want to, first of all, thank you. That was so great. I'd like to go back to something, including the shrimp Jesus. I have not been enlightened, but that will be my first Google when we finish here. I want to go back to something that Anakin, you started to touch on, about how the internet isn't a neutral space, and how we escape onto the internet to find community, because there's this idea that, you know, the real world sucks, real world. And you don't have to be anyone on the internet. You can be whatever you want to be. And it's this idea that you kind of, Alex, Colin, and I are in a art and technology class this semester, and we've been spending a lot of time talking about cyberfeminism and this idea of slipping in and out of different avatars and different skins, and how the internet is fundamentally malleable, and that we can shift and change in ways that the quote unquote real world doesn't always enable. And that comes with this idea that the internet doesn't speak back to us, that there aren't any implications of using that space and doing that thing. But like you said, there are physical storerooms that exist on usually occupied land. And there are implications that the medium has that are gendered and racialized and all of the things. And I'd be curious to know more about how the archives of those gendered and racialized, et cetera, histories play into your work and your practice. This wasn't one of my prepared questions, but I feel like we're going in that direction, and I'd really like to hear more about that from you guys.
Yeah, just processing. I feel like, especially if you're just somebody who is any flavor of marginalized, your experience in the world, whether it be the real world or the internet, is colored by your marginalization to some extent. And so your experience of what you seek out, what gets fed to you also, because the thing about the internet is, like you said, it's not a neutral space, but it's also not entirely within our control. It's a lot of algorithms, it's a lot of demographic data, it's a lot of just your data being taken. I'm working on a separate piece right now, which is why I'm thinking about this, but about the idea of like data and how that is in a way like a digital body of yours. And so, you know, if your reality involves marginalization, to some extent, that's something that the internet can grasp onto. And what gets more attention on the internet than rage bait and things that make you angry? So, no, yes, we exist in echo chambers, which is my own sentiment that I'm now contradicting, but we also are being fed content that has the purpose of making us upset. And so I feel like that is also an effect in my own artistic practice. As I've said, I'm working on a piece right now that involves that, because I've just been thinking about algorithms and the way that we're collected and harvested for our data, and this digital body is being used against us, and in a way is being used for the labor and profit of these corporations, and it's just another form of exploitation.
I don't necessarily tackle these subjects directly in my work, but when I do, it's based on my personal experiences rather than talking for a community of people. And usually, like on the internet, with like the avatars and all of that, like I could depict myself as how I am now, but usually I'll like change myself up, like to be a completely different person, to like maybe just being white completely instead of Asian. And like that doesn't have any like implications for what I'm doing, but obviously that can be considered like catfishing in a way, like that could be harmful in a way. But like when it comes back to like race, like oftentimes for some reason people are often like interested in knowing what race I am, and so sometimes I like to try and embed these type of questions into my work, into how sort of common that sort of question is, like, and how it's kind of not seen as maybe unsincere, but like it's kind of offensive in a way to me, because it's like you're not really curious about me, you're more curious about how I look. And so that's kind of something that gets embedded into my work more subtly, but it's not sort of the central theme of my work, because I feel like that should just come more quietly in the background.
I feel that what you mentioned about others looking at you and imposing a judgment on you based on how you look, and people, I guess, feeling entitled to it to the point that even online they're asking your identity. I mean, we had this reading in this class with Charles by Legacy Russell, and in it she talks about being a glitch feminist, and she explains that in some ways the online is an important space for marginalized people, especially people who are like subjected to like the racialized gaze, where they're forced to become an other in the by people around them IRL. Well, she uses the term AFK, away from keyboard, and she speaks of the internet as a space where you can perform different identities and experiment with who you are to kind of live a different life. And she also acknowledges, of course, the problematics of the online as well, because it's still a space where these discriminations exist, like they persist, but it's still versus the AFK where I'm subjected to the gaze of other people. If I speak about my personal experience, especially as someone transgender, IRL, I'm very much subjected to the assumptions of people who look at me and who have to decide my gender for me. And it's done unconsciously, it's not done maliciously, but online, I found that it gave me the opportunity to express myself and be taken the way I want to be taken, and kind of regaining that control. And I found that to be really meaningful in glitch feminism, because she talks a lot about queerness, she talks a lot about trans identities, and I that just really resonates with me as someone transgender, and not every trans person has easy access to medical transition. Often you'll see this sort of replicated actually in queer spheres, where in a queer circle, you're more easily able to, you're taking each other's identity seriously, and it comes naturally, whilst in bigger, maybe more cishet circles, it doesn't come as easily. You have to fight, and it's exhausting. So I feel like the online kind of let me be myself in that way, in like queer spaces, AFK.
Yeah, if I can talk about that personally too. I think me as well, I came out online before ever coming out to people in person. And I remember I was on Tumblr way too young. But that Tumblr was kind of my first exploration towards my identity and towards aesthetic values as well. Just reblogging stuff I liked, and I could change it up any day I wanted. I could reblog stuff about fandoms one day and then stuff about aesthetic goth stuff if I wanted the other day. And that level of freedom wasn't affected by other people's vision. It was something that was kind of completely for me, because personally I saw all those people like leaving notes or comments or whatever as anonymous, just not people, since they were behind a username and no icon or whatever. So that freedom of internet anonymity, which I think we've kind of lost nowadays, since everything is so connected, like your Instagram is connected to your TikTok, and it's all through your email, and you can find someone else like super easily online, which I feel like is an important aspect of the internet that we've kind of lost, to explore identity and just creating fake accounts and doing bullshit and just catfishing people online. And like that was a fun aspect that I feel like we can't do anymore or can't explore as much. Not the catfishing, but identity exploration. Which I feel like we've kind of lost, and there's kind of this grief of losing the anonymity we could have before. Yeah.
I feel like this connects to the work that we make, and I feel like art can serve as a response to losing a space like that, the ability to explore your identity and explore yourself via the internet or any other thing that the internet can be used for. I think that that's a primary reason why I make the work that I do, is to create a new space that speaks maybe in a language I like and I'm familiar with, like internet language, YouTube videos, weird YouTube poops is the thing that you would call kind of the queering the machine sort of format, where you take clips and you decontextualize them and you mash them all together in a new way, and speaking a language that's familiar but maybe not as common, and finding a way to integrate that into an artistic practice. And I began in painting and drawing, and I found that that was just not a way for me to express what I wanted to do. And the more I make work, the more I realize that I need words, I need visuals, I need a way of combining them together, and why I come to video and to technology as part of my artistic integration.
I wanted to quickly speak to, Colin, what you were saying, and running on you as well, because when you're referencing Legacy Russell and glitch feminism, the crux of that is a question of legibility, right? Like, oppressive systems function by defining and conquering. You have to be able to be put in a specific category, male, female, black, white, Asian, whatever it may be, straight, gay, and there's very little room to move between those or move across or be in none of them at all. And that's something that the internet makes so possible, is that you have the option to be entirely illegible by performing something that you are not, or by constructing your legibility in a way that you have more control over. And what's really interesting is I think this control over legibility is something that has become an extreme obsession, especially in this very hyper-individualist culture, which I think comes to the point of what you were bringing up about aesthetics. That word aesthetic ruled Tumblr when I was there. And I think still in TikTok today, it's like, what's your aesthetic that defines who you are? It's like,
I think now it's the cores.
Yes, the cores. It's just the language has changed, but the concept is the same. And that staunch dedication to being perceived in a certain way, I think is a consequence of the freedom that comes with being able to define yourself on your own terms on the internet. And it's strange how it's gone in this kind of loop of being something very liberatory to being something that traps us in this, oh my god, I can't post this picture of my friend because it doesn't match my Coquette Core Instagram account, you know? So I think that it's interesting that these sources of freedom end up merging in something that I think really harms us. And we keep coming back to this paradox of the internet being really exciting and liberatory and freeing, and also so soul crushing. And there's something sticky there that I'd like to get attached to. I don't know. I'd like to bring us back. We've gotten pretty conceptual, which I love, but let's bring us down to earth and talk about actually your specific works that are in this show. And the theme for Art Matters this year, which we haven't talked about at all. It's play and process, by the way. And I'm curious. I mean, you had to submit your work to the festival, so I'm curious about how you think of play and process being relevant themes to either your practice or the completed art object. And I think particularly in this conversation about the internet and memeage, if you could speak a little bit to how the internet has shaped the way we play in this day and age as well.
I think maybe we could start. I remember when we first started working on the DIY slam tutorial Novorex. It was for an assignment in our video class last semester. And our prof had asked us to team up into teams of 2 or 3s. And I'd had a class with Anakin before last year. But we never really collaborated in that class. We never really talked much, but I remembered their work and the way that it was kind of my vibe as well. And we connected a lot of topics. And to like brainstorm our first collaboration, I guess, we ended up listing words, and playfulness and like returning to childhood and like the inner child was definitely on there in our initial list. So it's kind of the base of our collaboration is this sense of playfulness and humor. And it's our kind of our entire process. So when we saw the call out for works for Art Matters, we were like, oh, we need to apply to this. This is us.
Yeah, and I just feel like so much of art school is not about having fun. Unfortunately, so much of life is not about having fun. So we wanted our process to involve things that we were interested in and having fun. Slime tutorials are silly. Some of the keywords we wrote down were just like pink, glittery, like stupid little words that just brought us a little bit of joy. And I feel like it's easy to get bogged down into the process of getting really conceptual, which is very interesting. And I do that, so I can't clown on it, but there's something also fun about being able to bring joy into the process and that play and being able to create a product that, yes, does delve into something deeper, into lived experiences and the internet culture and all the things that we want to talk about, but still being able to have fun with it. And I feel like that shows in what we created, that it's just a little silly, and that if you watch it and you think that it's a little silly and that's what you take away from it, I'm happy with that.
Play for me comes with doing the practical parts of the work. So that means actually experimenting with the work and finding something that you like either visually, or you can kind of make a theme with whatever you created. And there's no like actual theme going into it, but you're just playing around until you find something that you like. And then process is really kind of analyzing the work and thinking about it and just stewing on it and then coming up with a theme eventually. And so that's how I sort of envision play and process in my work. It's not so much like I'm just an artist, but I'm also a student, so I'm not perfect at anything that I'm doing. I'm just trying to experiment. And so that's by going through play and just playing and iterating over constant work is finally how you get a result that seems interesting, but you can still move on and work forward with. So that's really how I envisioned playing process when submitting the work.
I agree. I think playing and playfulness can stem, well, for me, like from, I don't know if I have this constructed sense of like not wanting to hustle, to kind of go against like the entire thing of hustle culture. I don't know if it's like a self-imposed laziness from like all the hours I spend on Instagram, or if it's like a voluntarily like revolutionary, radical. I want to go against the system, and I don't want to work hard, but at the same time, like, yeah, this concept of labor, it will be implicated at some point in the process. And yeah, a lot of times in my work, like when I like the only times I can actually get myself to go make images is like when I'm in more like frolicking and like no, but more like miscellaneous random moments where I'm not like so overwhelmed by like having to do work. Like it has to be like a sort of like playful and intuitive process for me to like not dread every single step of the way of like art making. But as it turns out, like this piece specifically was probably like the more labor intensive piece that I did, because usually I just take a photo, scan it, print it, like that's it. But now I like really wanted to maybe like deconstruct this process of like, you know, shooting the image and doing the composition, but then like the second part of the workflow is manipulating images. And then like obviously there's a lot to say about how the manipulation process itself is sort of like, for me, it's my painting of the canvas is like, I wanted to, you know, do this color scheme or that color scheme, etc., etc. So yeah, I think, yeah, just playfulness.
I feel that deeply, especially the emotions you associate with playfulness, because when I saw play and process, my first few thoughts were like, this is so silly. We're playing now. I love playing. We all love playing, but playing, if I think about the term and I think about how I play in my artworks, I feel it's an emotional term. It makes me feel satisfied. It makes me feel, what's the term, mischievous, maybe a little bit like I need to try something different. Like, ooh, I find playfulness to be something that's honestly very present in my practice, just because I feel like artists have it in them to play with things, to deconstruct things. As you said, I feel, at least personally, I find a lot of satisfaction in kind of finding the small hook, the small idea that like grabs me and that says, you should play with me, you should delve into this. And it's a fun process. Like my works, I mean, I also have to be honest, I made both of these works for class. Like I had professors who were like, you have a final project, it's due in 2 weeks, and I crunched them out. But I can't say I didn't have fun making. It's like painful fun. Actually, it's very painful, but it's a lot of fun. It's very playful for me, and I especially enjoy the fact that in my works I get to explore something that I'm not entirely sure of, and that's where the process comes in. Like Alex said, the playing is the exploring and kind of being guided by my emotions and wanting to explore and try something new. And the process is sitting afterwards and sitting with it and trying to understand what does this mean. Like when it comes to memes, for example, I don't want to just associate memes equal playfulness, because I think we can all agree that like memes are kind of like media fast food, like very easily digestible. It's a quick, and you honestly, can you even recall the 10 memes? Because no, probably not, right? It's quite hard. So like, yes, memes can be play in that sense, like they're what's the term? They're for fun, right? They're not serious, but my playfulness was challenging that notion of memes being simply playful, because I felt that they actually say a lot more if you sit with them and if you really look at the effect. I feel like memes are kind of a pulse of our culture and say a lot about the unconscious. I don't want to sound like I'm referencing Freud, but you know, yeah, it's saying a lot of things that we're not saying outright in bold, and I feel that it ramps up and it ramps up, and when events happen, you turn to memes and you look at this kind of like production of quick emotional bite-sized media, and you're like, oh my god, of course, where how could we have not seen this? I think my playfulness when I submitted my works, I wanted to challenge the lack of seriousness when it comes to memes, and I'm not gonna say memes are art because I'm not sure. I think I've asked people this, and people have asked like, do you think memes are art? And that's not a question that's answerable like in one sentence. But I definitely wanted to challenge in my works with playfulness how memes are more than what they seem or more than what we give them credit for. So kind of like defending them honestly, like just being like, hey, you should look at this. And also I found very important to do that playfully, to approach memes seriously, but playfully. See, that sounds very contradictory, but I want you to look at my works and kind of laugh a little and not take it very seriously, and to just approach it your way. So that's what I thought of playfulness. But honestly, I find that playfulness is especially present in a lot of artworks. So I think play and process as a theme is a pretty great theme. Yeah.
Is it quick because we have to move to the Q&A?
Kind of.
Okay.
I think what Colin was saying is very similar to our approach. And it's just the importance of playfulness. And once, if you're having fun doing your work is going to be easy, much easier. Even if the task is miles long, it's going to go by fast because you're just having fun. And fun and playfulness is so healing. And to have that in your artistic practice is, yeah, so healing and so fun.
I was having a whole conversation. I don't know, is Sam in the room? I don't know. I don't see her. But we were having a whole conversation earlier about how the show is funny. Like it's funny and it doesn't take itself too seriously, and how it's serious about things that are usually considered to be kind of silly and frivolous, and is really silly about things like having a breakdown of being overwhelmed while doing your job. And that's something that I was really interested and really excited about in putting these works together, is that I think, obviously in the Academy in art history, silliness and fun and generally positive emotions don't have an extensive history of being taken seriously, when I actually think that they are the most important and the most interesting thing about any kind of art making. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that you are also invested in challenging those notions. And with that, I'm going to move us to the Q&A section of this evening. There's a mic right there if you would like to ask some questions. I don't know if there's any questions in the live stream
Not
chat.
yet.
Not yet. Anybody? Up to the mic, please. I'll give you a second to move.
Hey, is this? Yeah. I have one question from Emmy's little brother. To Alex, you mentioned being inspired by certain video games. Zeke would like to know which video games in particular granted you inspiration.
On the spot. There's a lot of games, but one game that inspires me a lot is called Journey, and it doesn't really have a goal, but it takes your character on this journey throughout different environments. And as I mentioned, the visuals is really what stands out for me in games more than the game mechanics and the actual playability. So that's one game, but there's also a lot of sandbox games that are interesting because that also introduces creativity within the game, because you can create whatever you want.
And then I have one more, just kind of for all y'all in general. I think there is a big difference between the persona we display in reality versus that we show. This has kind of been touched on throughout the talk. Do you notice, particularly those of you who have a practice that doesn't solely rest in the digital sphere, do you notice that kind of digital persona bleeding into your practice more when you are creating digital art compared to that when you are creating, like, I guess, tangible art, be the term?
I think if I can speak for myself in a weird way, my photo work it tends to be more conventional, and I think that has something to do with institution spaces, kind of like curating visions and art movements. I feel like in a weird way, my digital work kind of embraces more of like my personal quirks, because like somehow I can sort of aim to convey it more. And my experience with the IMCA departments is that like you said that like this show doesn't take itself seriously, and I kind of noticed that like in a lot of my intermediate classes, like it's a lot less loose. Like it's a lot of us are just like nerds, you know, and geeks, and in like more like conventional art practices, which is actually really funny to call photography more traditional, because like photography was like the like odd one out in the fine arts.
The middle child.
Exactly, but like now we're moving into the era where like photography is like, it's such an old medium. Like, oh, you're shooting on negative film. Like, okay, grandpa. And yeah, I think like, yeah, there just seems to be more freedom with digital medium and digital works, you know, in a weird way.
I think when you spoke about institutions, that made me kind of reflect for a moment. And I thought, because as a first year, I feel somewhat new to the whole uni experience of taking my artworks more seriously. So I'm a Dawson graduate. I graduated from Interactive Media Arts, and that was a lot more focused on game design and general digital art. But at the time, I didn't take, I guess, my art very seriously, like in a conceptual way or for the institutions. Like I wasn't making it to make a statement. It was very much making things because I wanted to, because I thought it was fun. And then on top of that, I got to research. And now that I'm in this space where I'm rewarded for creating like wordy statements and being very brainy, I do wonder if it's like I use digital references in a lot of different mediums, kind of for fun because I'm interested in it and it comes easy to me and it's something I can latch onto. But I'm also trying to be very trying to gain awareness of how this might limit me in my other practices. How, in a way, now you can gain social capital from just being like cool because you make a lot of online references. Like the geek nerdy thing is now cool, and I sometimes notice myself posting things and I made this cool shirt, but guys, it has a meme on it. And as much as I loved making it, I question my intentions and I question whether bringing digitality into all these mediums, is it because it's really meaningful to me, or is it because it's become an identity? So thank you for that question. I don't know.
Yeah, for me personally, I feel like it's kind of the opposite, except for the two works we've created together. My digital programming, installation, whatever, art practice was kind of more conceptual than my painting practice, which I've been painting for much longer than I've been working on any digital media. But my painting so far has evolved into, I make much more digital references in my paintings than in my other works, like video or installation. So yeah, it's kind of the opposite of Ibrahim, I guess. But I think it's because painting is so just visual, and there's nothing else, and you just stare at an image, which for me, I've related a lot to just staring at images on Instagram and on social media. So I'm kind of bringing those digital images and copying them in physical material. while the digital aspect I feel is much more forgettable, so I can create kind of anything. Like my programs are just going to get lost on my computer at some point and I'll probably forget about them. But then, yeah, painting has, for me, kind of to be more important since it's physical. Because I'm going to stare on my wall for forever now. But yeah, or someone else is going to stare at it on their wall, which is also strange. So yeah, it's kind of all combining right now. But yeah.
Well, thank you. Hi, I had a question for Anakin and Marianne about DIY slime tutorial. No, Borax? Borax. I was almost at Bojax. I was specifically interested about in the part where like the character or the presenter is like mixing slime and glitter together, and they seem to have this like mental breakdown while doing it. While I was watching it at first, I just thought it was kind of funny because it was like absurd in the sense that this character was just doing something as simple as making slime and just having this like existentialist nightmare. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh wait, is this like meant to be sort of this realization that they're stuck in the past doing this thing forever, this realization that they're kind of in a video that's forever repeating. But then you guys spoke about sort of the playfulness and the fun in creating, and then I kind of went back to it just being kind of funny. But I wanted to ask what your intention was behind that sort of decision to make them have this sort of breakdown, because I was really interested in it.
I feel like that's a really interesting take on it, the way that you're characterizing this person as like looking towards the past and being stuck in a video. We definitely weren't as meta as that. I think personally my intention with that work was more thinking about the pressures of society and capitalism, or just life in general, being all on you, but then you still have to create and produce stuff. And then for that character was a slime tutorial. But we were also thinking about all the people on TikTok that were just crying on live and stuff, and just like there's so much content of people crying online, which is so awkward and so weird and just kind of silly at that point, which is the effect we wanted to work on. Yeah.
For me, it was definitely particularly about the idea of persona online and like choosing to present yourself a certain way. So I think your take about the idea of being stuck in this loop super interesting, because somebody could be crying on a YouTube video, that you just usually cut it and then get to the next part. And so I think focusing on what we choose to hide and who we choose not to be is more the intentionality I think I put behind it. But this idea of being stuck, I think, is definitely something that you've picked up from the work that was there, at least on my end, from intentions.
Cool, thank you so much.
Great work, everyone, by the way. I don't remember who you were quoting, but you were talking about AFK versus IRL terms. I found that really interesting because, I mean, obviously I know what the terms mean in a very literal sense, but I really like the idea of, and this came up a bunch too in the talk, like real life versus online, and like to what extent which one is which, or to what extent is online is or is not real life. So I was just curious on your like personal take or societal take on AFK versus online. Do you think it's more accurate to say AFK in this day and age? And if so, what does that mean? How do you feel about it? You know, and that's potentially a question for anyone.
AFK is away from keyboard, and IRL is in real life. And I mentioned it because one of the readings I had in that class, Legacy Russell talks about honoring the online spaces, and by using terms like in real life to mean when you're, I guess, not online, we kind of tend to imply that the online is not a part of real life, that it's somehow secondary. And we can talk about the philosophy of it. I think I read this one short paper about, it was like talking about the idealism in it and how the online, she approaches the online as this ephemeral, like, non-material space that is just as real as the material one. And she talks about AFK, Legacy Russell, because she wants to kind of bridge the gap between IRL and online as like one continuous thing and not as these separate spheres where one is real and the other isn't. And when it comes to me, what I think of AFK or IRL, I never really put that much thought into whether the terms mean that much. I guess when I use them myself, I use them interchangeably. In my head, AFK to me is kind of a gamer term. If I'm honest, it's like, is this guy AFK? But I do think that Legacy Russell brings up a good point of honoring these online spaces as something that are meaningful and that exist. I just don't know if I would make that, I would put the emphasis on changing those terms. But it is an interesting concept. Yeah, so if you're interested in her reading, it's Glitch Feminism.
We have a copy at home.
Great.
Okay.
For me, the most important part about the idea of IRL, AFK, this digital existence is that they are not separate in the way that I see it. I don't remember where I'm getting this idea, but it is not mine. The idea is that the internet is not a separate thing, but a kind of a layer that overlays our kind of IRL existence, in that being online and the way that we act online, it does affect how we act in real life. And the two of them speak to each other. And I feel like for me, that's definitely the framework, is that they're very much not distinctly separate and that they have a relationship, and you have a relationship with both of them in a way that overlaps.
I feel like the term AFK is also not really true anymore. We're never really away from our keyboard, which is kind of what you were saying. We're so online, so connected all the time, and internet is everywhere right now. If you just go upstairs to the library, there's gonna be some accessible if you want. And we have our phones, so it's not the keyboard anymore. It's not, you're never really away from your keyboard.
Yeah, the Meta headset.
Yeah,
you don't need a keyboard for that. You're just there.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you guys.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My question is for Anakin and Marianne on the slime tutorial piece. I wanted to ask specifically about your use of the jump cut within the piece. It's something that I'm really fascinated by, the divisiveness of it, because the creator of the jump cut was both a filmmaker and a magician, and he saw the potential of it as time travel and magic. But on the other hand, there's this structural resistance to it. The 30-degree rule exists to avoid it entirely. I wanted to ask about your own interpretations on the use of it and the place it has within your piece.
So I did the editing for the slime tutorial, and it was a very difficult decision on where to put cuts, because this was made for the context of the class. It's not a piece that we were able to make in the way that we originally envisioned, which would have been with no cuts. But I think that the way that I chose to work with the idea of the jump cut and this idea of stopping and starting again was in dialogue with the idea of the work referring to what is choosing to be represented, and to have a cut and to have somebody crying anyways, to not cut away from things that we do typically cut from.
There's also the main jump cut that's in between, right before I start crying. The reason we have it also is because I couldn't cry on cue. I tried really hard, but then I had to use menthol. Secret, if you want to cry, just put menthol under your eyes. But there had to be a jump cut to hide me applying menthol, because I'm not a good actress. But yeah, the other ones were just edits to get the vibe of the slime tutorial itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm one of the old people in the room here. So when you guys are talking, Abraham, I thought it was interesting you were talking about how you didn't grow up surrounded by technology, but I'm assuming that most of you did, because some of you sat on my lap as I played World of Warcraft as babies. So I'm wondering, when we wonder, digital work is so powerful for producing, but there's also a loss of hands-on activities if you grew up doing that instead of. And I'm wondering if you feel that the balance is towards empowering, or if there's also stuff where you're like, gee, I wish I had used my hands more instead of done everything digitally. Is it helping or hurting or both?
Well, since you're my mother, I guess I'll answer first. I feel like I don't know if I have a clear-cut answer on either or, because obviously there's a lot of stuff that I feel like I did, miss out on, and that maybe had I been born in a different time would have been more prevalent in my life, just even the idea of playing outside instead of being on a digital device. But when it comes to artistic creation, I think that it has just tuned me into a different way of creating, a way that would not have been available to me without the digital age. But I feel like there's a conversation between those elements that involves grief and feeling like there's something that I did not have the chance to have, but also some empowerment in what I can play with, and then what I do have, how can I talk back to it?
Yeah, I think if I can remind what Alex was saying earlier, which is that so many softwares and programs for digital art making are so accessible, and so a lot of it is open source. But there's also a lot of it that is remembering physical media. Like if you do 3D modeling, 3D sculpting, it's the same thing as sculpting. You're just doing it in the digital sense, and there's still a lot of physical work done into that. Like you need materials, you need physical elements to make that stuff work. And then you're editing a video, it's also kind of like painting. It's kind of like photographing in real life as well. And just digital painting is the same as well. And for me, even programming is kind of just trying to figure out how to place your materials, how to place your colors. It's just a different creativity, I guess. But even when you're producing a purely digital work, there's still some physical element to it. But if we take our installations, for example, we wanted to really have the physicality of the TVs and the wires and all the guts of the machine into it, because it fits with what we wanted to create. And then for glitter slime tutorial, that was also very physical work for me. I had to make the slime to film it. It's not a purely digital work. So I don't think there is purely digital work. It still translates somehow to physical media.
Yeah, I agree also. My work is completely digital, but I feel like there's parts of it that are hands-on, especially with the 3D aspects. But also for my practice, it's mainly digital work. And now with more advanced technology, there's I'm working with machine learning and using the body as an act or a tool. So that kind of bridges that hands-on activity with technology in a way, in a new sense, that I think is very interesting. And it does involve sort of using your hands and kind of getting away from the screen in that sense. So that's how I kind of see it.
I mean, it makes me think how many digital works I make, and that made me reflect on whether they make me feel good. And if I'm completely honest, what feels good is kind of this grind and this I love this topic, I love what I'm making and going. But I think in a way it is kind of soul crushing to be in my bedroom surrounded by monitors for 8 hours straight. And I've done the 13-hour 3 cans of Red Bull editing for the next day. And I can't say it's very I'm in touch with God and myself. It's kind of honestly awful for your psyche. And I mean, I'm not a big painter. I've not done a lot of art in different mediums, but I have dipped my fingers in them. I've done ceramics, I paint sometimes, I've done print, and I guess I've always kind of walked away from those feeling maybe a little bit more fulfilled, honestly, than if I were to spend 3 hours drawing on my iPad versus 3 hours glazing a cup. And honestly, I don't know if there's this anti-tech bias in me, or if this means more. I wish I could give a better, more thought out answer. But that I do notice that in me. But a lot of my works are digital, and I'm quite interested in those topics and in those mediums. And to me, they're very satisfying in their own. It's just like you should take breaks, you should go outside. And I also don't know if like my room was just like on the balcony, and if I was always in the sun, maybe I would be feeling a lot better. I do definitely think that there's a little bit something soulless about purely digital mediums. And I hope I don't sound too anti-tech, but I do notice that pulse, and I guess I want to say like I feel it. I feel it, despite being mostly an artist that like I love spending time on my computer. Right? But yeah, yeah. Oh, and what Alex said, there are actually a lot of like electronic works and works that use computers that also use the body, right? And that also aren't necessarily just on the computer. But I feel like those are like there's like two sides to it. You have to program it, and then there's the IRL aspect.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. But if there's more, we'll have about 20, 30-ish minutes before we have to start deinstalling. So if you have any other questions, just feel free to come up to these guys. They're all very approachable.
Hi. I kind of have two questions, but I'll limit it to one. And it's quite simple and sweet. But I had a question for Colin, actually. In your video where you see hands kind of picking hands, as somebody who bites their nails a lot, I obviously took attention to that. I was wondering why you chose nail picking and then this kind of like deconstruction of the video. Was it supposed to represent kind of being overwhelmed or overstimulation? But then it also kind of simmers down at the end where you kind of close all tabs and then you see the title. I was wondering what the skin picking meant for you specifically.
I can go into the process of it and why choosing it. I actually, kind of ironically, am not someone who picks at their fingers that much. I have my other nervous tics. But I decided to do that because I wanted to kind of create a work that required you to endure a performance, especially something kind of unnerving and kind of long. And I found actually a lot of people responding to that video were saying that they related or they felt that anxiety through the screen, that they also pick at their hands. And I like felt for them. I wouldn't relate necessarily because it's not what I do the most often, but I do feel that anxiety too. I especially chose that gesture, that repeating gesture that would stick there and that wouldn't leave, despite how much you kind of wanted it to do something else, because I wanted the audience, and this was my intent, to kind of like focus more on the properties of the video than just the action. But I remember having my critique in class about this and my professor approaching it through a lens of like viewing performance works. And I thought that was very interesting how even in institutions, people will approach these videos differently. And I was trying to recall like random online files, like finding like a YouTube video with like 3 views, and it's like, what is this? Is this from 2010? But hearing a lot of responses like from you about how you're approaching this work with what are the hands doing, what does it mean? I find that honestly very interesting and just as important to approaching how, like, analyzing how we approach these mediums and what the clues on the screen tell us about the work. Yeah, but yeah, I don't pick up my hands very much.
Thank you.
How are we for time?
We have like 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to spend 3 minutes saying thank you. Huge thank you to Jen Jack, who's sitting up here in the front row. They've been so incredible. Yeah, make it louder. Thank you. Thank you. This is the last event for Art Matter 2024, and Jen and Ari have just been powerhouses throughout the whole process, and I'm so grateful to have been their employee. It's been super awesome, and they're the best. And obviously, thank you to all of you guys for submitting your work for the show, for agreeing to be in the show. I'm not going to say who, but there were two hesitant. I'm not sure about this when I sent those first emails, so I'm really glad you guys came around and everybody's here. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming and for being here tonight. The work is, like I said, going to be up for another 20-30 minutes while we mingle, and then we're going to unplug everything and it goes to the digital graveyard. So, so go spend some time with it, say hi to these folks, congratulate them, and have a beautiful rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmy. Thank you, Emmy.
Okay. I'm gonna end this now.
You too. You were just, I think.
Oh.